want to do today is really pick up on a lot of what we both, I know, Shri, you and I both heard a lot about during the SHRM conference, which was a lot like what you were describing in your comments, your opening comments, Sri. All that everybody has going on, everything that we've been through, especially over the past couple of years with the pandemic, HR, the role that you've played, the seat at the table that you have been able to gain because of a lot of that, and the needs and opportunities to retain that seat at the table, given all of the other types of business issues and challenges and opportunities that you are a part of each and every day. But with that comes a lot of churn, a lot of anxiety, a lot of overwhelm. Oftentimes we feel like we've been through the fire a lot of times every day. So it's important for us to think about resilience and how we can lead in a more positive manner with more adaptability and, really get through these times personally and get through these times professionally with our teams and leading our teams as well. So what I want to do today is really just share some ideas with you that are keys to help you to discover your new superpower. There is superpower in resilience. And so how can you navigate this environment of ongoing disruption, change, uncertainty, transition that you're leading in many instances? And with all of that, how can you make sure that you're taking care of yourself, thinking about overall well-being for yourself, for your organization and your teams as well? That's what we want to get more into today. The other thing I want you to keep in mind is that beyond the crises that we have all been through, and that we remember and still are going through, how we lead through the everyday challenges that emerge really define us as leaders and define us as organizations. I hear so much in a lot of my workshops, as I did in the SHRM conference, but you can imagine comments like this. I mark one thing off my list and I add 5 more. It just seems like there's wave after wave. We just can't seem to catch a break. And so it's the things that you came into work today, and there were things that I didn't have on my to-do list. By the time I get to the end of the day, I feel like I didn't get anything on my to-do list done because there were all of these things that came up for me over the course of the day. So how do you deal with those? That really is what defines us as leaders and helps us personally to get through all the change and all of these daily disruptions. With all of that, we're just now beginning to talk about mental health and the mental health crises that everything that we've been through, and yet previously unspoken, even all of these day-to-day disruptions and surprises that come up, all of that creates stress, creates overwhelm, creates burnout. We've even seen that in some more public figures in the most recent, even 12 months. We saw during the US Open and the French Open last year, Naomi Osaka, and during the Olympics, Simone Biles. At the SHRM conference last fall, we heard from Michael Phelps, and they all talked about some of their challenges. Even Grammy Award winning songwriter and singer Selena Gomez has most recently been talking about some of the challenges that she's dealt with. And she created a website and a resource called Wondermind. You have to check that out because she shares resources to help do 2 things. 1, reduce the stigma of mental health needs. And then 2, to provide resources for people to be able to take advantage of. So you'll have to check that out. And I'm reminded of a comment that Naomi Osaka made during one of the interviews after one of the tournaments last year, where she said, when I don't really feel happy, but when I feel relieved is when I feel more relieved. Let me say that again. When I feel more relieved when I win, not really happy. But when I lose, she said, I feel very, very sad. I feel very sad. And we know that this mental health crisis is at an extreme and significant cost to us as humans, to the human capital in our organizations, and to the bottom line. It's often the human capital that gets missed in crisis and change, and when we're going about our day to day, just trying to keep up with everything. In fact, a study by the Limeade Institute found that over 43% of professionals in their survey said that over the past week, they had experienced burnout. And the cost financially of mental health and burnout and stress cost organizations over $300 billion a year in healthcare costs and stress-related absenteeism, in effects on productivity, all the day-to-day that we expect and need for our employees, their presence, their engagement. And a lot of times it's not there. We also find these days that people are voting with their feet. If I'm not working in an environment that values me, that I feel like I have an opportunity to do good work, that gives me some flexibility, and I have a manager who I feel like helps me to work through a lot of these stressful times and creates an environment where we can do that better as a team, then people are deciding they're going to leave. And in fact, the Society for Human Resource Management shared last year that we could possibly expect turnover rates as high as 30%, if you can imagine that, from this transition of expectations that employees have for their workplaces. So we've got to do things differently. And I want to ask you for a moment, just to think about for a minute. What is it, when you think about all of the things that come up for you every day, those surprises, those disruptions, thinking about turnover, people leaving and having to constantly hire people, what is it that is keeping you up at night? I would love to see just a few comments in the chat, if you will. What's keeping you up at night? What are some of those things that are burdensome or surprises that come up for you? What are we seeing in the chat? All right.
Yeah, questions or thoughts you can add in the chat. I will add uncertainty in the future. The VUCA world, which has become more VUCA than ever before. I think that's what keeps me at night, to be honest.
Yeah.
Somebody said economic crisis. Conversations that I need to have and how to word them. That's a good one.
Yeah. Excellent. And we are, as human resources professionals, just put in the middle of all of these things going on, whether it is the financial crisis, it is supply chain crisis, it is inflation. Of course, we know wages are going up too, which creates pressure on the bottom line, which creates pressure for all the business partners that you are working with your teams. So, all of this we find ourselves in the middle of. So what is it that employees find are keeping them up at night? I'm going to make this a little bit bigger because I want to share these areas with you. Employees feel like that they are really experiencing more overload and increases in workload. And in fact, if you saw the HR Magazine spring issue, you were able to see what some of these challenges were that people brought up. Control, not feeling like they have autonomy over their work. rewards and recognition, feeling like I'm seen, getting the kind of feedback that's positive, constructive, feeling like I work in a community of people, or not feeling like I'm isolated, or there's a lot of conflict going on all the time, feeling like that I'm treated fair and value, doing meaningful work, and working for an organization who takes their purpose seriously. Now, all of these are areas that are concerns of employees, and they're looking for workplaces that are different as a result. But given the way we lead and we deal with a lot of these daily challenges, it evokes these fears in people and us individually, because we don't know the VUCA world that you mentioned, Shri, that, is one of the things that's keeping you up at night, the volatility, the, uncertainty that we're dealing with. So people have real fears around that uncertainty. I don't know what's going to happen next. I'm trying to protect myself. I fear loss. Things are not like they used to be. I'm comfortable with the way things were. Or I'm afraid to try something new. What if I fail? We are becoming organizations that are more risk averse sometimes in this environment because there's so much uncertainty. There's so much fear. But when we do, we fall into, fears create this amygdala response, or this emotional response, where we have this, what we call an emotional hijack, that it means that we're going to respond to crises in different ways. And I found in my research, I'm going to make this bigger as well so that you can see it here. But people respond in crises, change, when they're going through transition, in a number of different manners. When we are responding in fear, we can respond as a victim. And I don't know about you, I remember in the early days of the pandemic when I didn't cause this. This is being put upon us here. We all have to deal with it now. There's so much that's out of my control. So what do I do? So we respond as a victim. Then we figure out that, we're going to just kind of settle in. We accept the way it is because, again, we have to ride this out. There's not much we can do. We then get into the surviving stage where we figure out, okay, maybe this is going to be around a while. This is going to be the new normal. So how do I make it work? And we figure out just kind of how to make it work, how to live in this new normal. Things are going okay. We don't want to rock the boat. But it really is not until we begin to think differently, begin to take that courageous step forward towards something different, that we can begin to even emerge toward thriving, where we have more optimism in thriving. We have and are taking more control of our situation, our options, and our outcomes. Now, there are a couple of things I want you to keep in mind when it comes to these stages of internal crisis response. One is that we're human and we're all going to go through all of these stages. And secondly, we're going to go through a journey through these stages. We may start at one point, something happens that's unexpected. We have some fear creep in. We're going to go back to the victim stage. We may bounce up to the surviving stage. We may even feel like we're at a point that we're thriving and something happens, and we can go back to feeling like that victim. We're human. We allow ourselves that space for that to happen. But it's what we're going to talk about here the rest of our time together today that helps us to move past that, where we have greater resilience when we are courageous and we're thriving. And we have that muscle memory to build upon to help us to move forward and move past and move through those surprises and disruptions whenever they do occur. Now, my next question for you is, how do you think about resilience? When you think about this word and this term, what comes to mind for you when you hear resilience? Go ahead and share in the chat. What are some of the words that come to mind when you think about resilience? What would it be for you, Sri, as we're waiting for some people to add some comments to the chat?
Yeah. So when I think about the word resilience, I think of it as um, something that bounces back from an adverse impact of the situation. So if you can bounce, if you get punched, it's not how many times you got punched, but how many times can you get up?
Mm-hmm.
I feel that defines resilience, is to be able to do that and be able to do that over and over again without losing your courage and your
Mm-hmm.
momentum and confidence, more importantly.
Yeah.
It is hard because you can try to do that once or twice, and eventually, like you said, you get the victim mentality, or you just accept instead of
Mm-hmm.
what I like, the word thriving, which you describe in your 5-stage approach. How do you get to a thriving where you are now in charge,
Yeah.
and not let the situation be in charge?
Mm-hmm.
I think
Yeah.
somebody mentioned here getting stronger with change, um, ability to recover quickly from a situation.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. That recovering, that coming back, and I wanted to give you some ideas around this concept of resilience. And um, I love the American Psychological Association's definition of resilience, because it is defined as how we adapt well when we're facing trauma, when we're facing crises, when we're facing disruptions, when we're facing change. And so it's the process of how we adapt in those situations. And I want you to think about, we often think about that bouncing back, as you mentioned, Shri, and a rubber band, and how a rubber band bounces back. I want you to think about some additional concepts around this whole resilience, and thinking about this rubber band analogy. And that is the fact that it does adapt. It has flexibility. It has agility. It also has purpose and utility, right? It holds things together, and we can use it time and time again, but it flexes, it adapts. And that's what I want you to think about and to keep in mind. One of the leaders that I interviewed for the Resilience Ready book was Tanya Jackson. She is the Senior Vice President and Supply Chain Officer for Lexmark International. And she talked about resilience with her team. And she said, really, it's about a mindset that we can get through this, and that we need space for imperfection. Imperfection is not the goal, that it's going to be messy, it's going to be bumpy, and we need to allow for that. And that way we can take risks. We can move through those stages of internal crisis response more effectively without beating ourselves up, but know that it's a process, and it's also something that we can do together. So when we think about resilient organizations and resilient teams and workplaces, and what employees want differently, what is it that they're looking for that's different than what they have today? Employees are looking for not only better compensation, which we expect them to have, but they're also looking for an employer that shares their values. They're looking for an inclusive workplace, more flexibility and work-life balance. But an organization and a manager who's willing to work with them. I love the next bullet: leadership, empathy, and concern about my well-being. Investing in me so that I am also ready to move with you as an employer with the skills that are needed for the future, and that I have the technology available to do the kind of job I need to do to be able to keep up, to be relevant, and to add value each and every day. So mirroring that then, if we're to be resilient leaders and have resilient workplaces, then how do we show up as leaders? What can we do differently to build more resilience within our personal lives, within our professional lives? I found in my research that those leaders, those individuals, those teams and organizations that have greater resilience really have resilience around these 5 core principles. And these core principles also have different leadership practices. People demonstrated different leadership practices and competencies and virtues and values in order to be and become more resilient and lead in a resilient way. So those key resilience ready principles are our perspective, purpose, perseverance, partnership, and praise. So what does it look like then when you put all these together and think about a resilient type of workplace? You know, resilience ready teams, they have different experiences. Human capital is important and at the forefront for those leaders and for those teams. And they demonstrate this type of environment and culture that is part of what our vision, our goals should be as we try to become more resilient leaders and more resilient organizations. So resilience ready teams, they rally around a meaningful purpose with a positive, we can do this together perspective. They pull together and trusted and inclusive and diverse relationships and partnerships so that they can persevere no matter what it is they're facing, and they can do that together. And resilience ready teams praise generously. They acknowledge and recognize not only the progress that's being made, the wins, but also the effort that's being made and being put in each and every day to make it happen each and every day. This is the type of experience we want to create in our workplaces. And so I've identified and want to share with you today, as we think about those 5 core resilience ready principles, you know, what can I do? What are 5 simple practices, approaches I can take right now, begin to implement today that can help me to become get on that journey to becoming a more resilient leader, be able to create that work environment, and to be able to create resilience within my team. So there are 5 key ways that just easily starting today, you can begin to make that difference. We're going to look at each of these with each of the resilience ready principles. So we're going to inspire optimism with perspective. With purpose, we're going to make purpose meaningful. With perseverance, we're going to set the stage for partnership, practice empathy and inclusion. And with praise, generously appreciate and recognize your team. All right, so let's jump in. You know, I have to share this story. This is Bob and Patricia Hall, who just maybe 3 weeks ago, on my way to work with a Fortune 100 company on a leadership development training. Actually, we were talking about growth, resilience related to growing a business and growing businesses. And on my plane ride between Houston and Orange County, California, I met Bob and Patricia Hall. And when I sat down, you know, we just began a conversation, and we actually ended up talking on the whole flight. But Bob and Patricia, leaders in their own way and in their own spaces. Bob had been part of the military in his career. He'd come out and been a business owner and grown and been very successful in business and in sales. And so he shared a lot of leadership nuggets, and I just took a lot of notes, and I just was able to soak up everything that he had to share. But there are a couple of quotes here that I want to share with you, because when it comes to perspective and how we think about our opportunities when we're going through change and when we're going through challenges, that's what's so critically important here. And so Patricia said to me, she said, "You don't get to pick your pain, but it is how you deal with it." There was a very personal story that she had to share about that within her family that really hit home with that for her. And then Bob said to me, "In the face of an impossible task, draw on all the resources you have and believe that you can overcome whatever obstacle is facing you." And it really is in that belief. Bob said he had faced cancer, he'd faced some other health challenges, as well as all of his military experience and business challenges that he'd faced. And what made the difference in all of it was part of his faith and his belief that you can get through it. And so for leaders, what we have to do for our organizations and our team, we've got to inspire that same type of optimism. Shift our perspective to focus on what's the possibilities. Now, I'm not asking you to take a Pollyanna view of the crisis or the challenges or that disruption, that surprise that came up when you got into work today that you weren't expecting, but that we really look at the realities of it and look past the why can't we's to how can we. So we ask a different question of ourselves. Also important for us is to have a good foundation of our values, our North Star to come back to. Self-awareness is a critical starting point when we're thinking about perspective and what drives our perspective. Values is one of those. One of the resources that I'm making available to you today is a value sort exercise. And you can scan this QR code and you can get right to be able to download that particular resource. But what that helps us to do is to really think about, narrow down, of all the things that are important to us, what's most important. And in this particular exercise, I have you think about how does that really affect my thinking, my thought process, and how I show up as an individual and as a leader. And in fact, one of the leaders that was in my SHRM Talent Conference session said, "I took this particular resource and downloaded it immediately, sent it off to my team, asked them to complete it. And when I get back from the conference, we're going to sit down and we're going to have a conversation about everybody's values so that we're well grounded around that in our team." Right? And you can do the same. So self-awareness, leading with our values, and how can we inspire that optimism. The second resilience ready principle is our purpose. And, my mother was very, very wise. And one of the wise things she said is, "You weren't born just to be born. You were born for a purpose." Purpose is, it goes along with that perspective. How do I see things? And then why do I get up every day? What really is important for me? And for employees, it's important for leaders to help connect them to why their work is important. Why is what you're asking me to do and show up for when I come to work every day? Why is that important? How does that make a difference to our customers? So see through the bottom line. Connect to why it's important for our customers and the difference that we as an organization are making, both for our customers and in our communities. So to do that, we make that purpose meaningful when we do that for each of the members of our team so that they can connect with their values. They know the values of the organization that they work for as well. And they know that the work I'm doing is making a difference. So we really have a tremendous role in helping to make sure people are doing meaningful work. And of course, we all have some grunt work to do. Everybody can't do all glamorous tasks each and every day. But even that's important. There's a job to be done. And why does even the mundane matter? The third resilience ready principle is perseverance. And what we often think about when we think about perseverance is running through the wall, much like this image here that I'm sharing with you, where we're just going full steam ahead. I can't stop until I make it to the top or push through the wall. And what I want you to think about, though, with perseverance, it is how we work smarter or can persevere smarter versus then harder. So it's all really about setting the stage for perseverance to be possible psychologically, emotionally, physically, relationally. So we as leaders, our opportunity here is to really set the stage. How are we setting the stage for overall well-being? And when I think about well-being, I want you to think about all aspects of well-being. There's so many aspects of well-being that are important for us to enable for our employees. What are we doing around our own personal, creating space for wellness, for exercise, for health? I had a coaching client who had some health challenges, and part of our work was figuring out a balance between one. Purpose was important for her, and she had felt like she'd sort of lost her purpose. So we worked a lot on finding meaningful purpose in her work and connecting that to what she loved, and realized that where she was and the work that she was doing was really meaningful. She needed to connect it differently and engage with some of the people she worked with a little bit differently, and then find some of those opportunities and those times where energy was best for her, where she could leverage some of the work that she needed to do. And how can you, as a manager, work on doing that for your team members also? And then trust and transparency is critically important. We hear a lot more about psychological safety these days, right? Psychological safety being an important piece of the culture and the environment that we work in, so that people can bring themselves, they can bring their best, they can take risks, especially in times of uncertainty. They can talk about the fears that they have and that we all have, and we can work through them together. So one of the questions I have for you, I really want you to think about these questions. And when I do workshops and work with leaders and HR professionals, I do some work with them really around building trust and transparency. And these are challenge questions for you. If we could create an environment where transparency and trust were demonstrated values, not just talked about, but were actually demonstrated, what would that look like for you? And then, after we get a picture of what that is, do we recognize our own organization in that description? Why or why not? And then third, what can we do to help realize our ideal environment where transparency and trust are demonstrated values? How can we make sure that we create that? Sri, I'd love to just stop for a moment and ask you, how does transparency and trust show up at Engagedly? How do you all create that?
Yeah, so transparency is actually quite important value. This is, in fact, one of our 5 values: transparency and trust, surprisingly. So the transparency really shows up in being able to keep everybody's goals open. So even at the executive level, at the organization level, all the data on our goals, our revenue, our growth, our customer satisfaction, all of the data is actually available for every employee to see. They can see the transparency of how well we are doing or how well we are not doing, and that's true for all levels across all entire organizations. So there's no hidden agenda, there's no hidden goals where we are hiding things to the organization. So I think that we do that as a practice, and we will continue to do that. Obviously, there are a lot of organizations that you can do that, especially if you're publicly traded. You definitely cannot do that. But as a private organization, we are not constrained by that. The trust part is being able to trust somebody means that you can give them the freedom to fail. And that's the whole problem, or not a problem, but the thing you talked about with psychological safety is the ability to be yourself and not try to put on a face when you walk into the organization, have that authentic self, bring your authentic self to the organization, and then trust that, organization will treat you the way you are and not what they think they want you to be. So I would say those are two ways we demonstrate that within the organization.
Excellent. That's excellent, and important, and that transparency that you talked about helps people to feel like I'm a part, I'm not just here, but, I'm part, I'm included in it. That will lead into the partnership that we're going to talk about next. And trust, I will say, is earned and trust is given.
Right.
Extended as well. But we earn trust first. We also extend that trust. So important concepts for us to work on. And as HR professionals, the culture and the work environment that we're in, so many times we hear people talk about HR not being trusted, right? And we're in the middle oftentimes dealing with many sensitive issues. And in fact, I've had people ask me that about human resources, ask me some of those kinds of questions. But we are in a position to really create an influence, I'll say, creating a more transparent and trusting and inclusive environment in our workplaces and as part of our culture, which leads me to the fourth resilience ready principle, which is partnership. And partnership is really about being inclusive. We heard this term during the pandemic so much. We will get through this together. And that takes so many connotations when we really think about that. And, I also love this quote by Henry Ford. He said, coming together is a beginning. Keeping together is progress. But when we work together, that is really success. And partnership, I also love this South African proverb, which is Ubuntu. I am because we are, and we are because I am. When we are going through challenges personally, so there are a few things here to keep in mind around partnership. One is for personal resilience. Sometimes we are afraid. It goes back to that stigma, that I have something that's going on, that I may have some fear, I may have some anxiety, overwhelm, some burnout myself. So we don't reach out to the resources that we need to be able to work our way through some of those challenges. We also need to make sure that we are open when people approach us and that we are proactively reaching out to our team members and lending a hand and making sure that they know what resources they have available to them. Know that we are there to support them and our team at large. And then making sure that we are also including everyone and being inclusive with our teams. One of your leadership actions here is to practice empathy and inclusion. We have our story. Everybody has a story. In the leadership and organizational behavior course that I teach part of for the University of Louisville College of Business, one of the case studies that I'm teaching the summer term, and our students just have this case study about empathy and accountability, where a leader did something sort of throwing their employee under the bus and not truly being honest. Later on, apologized for some of the personal things that she had going on. And in the discussions, some of the students had trouble with, and I do as well, with the integrity and the values, the accountability piece, and yet extending empathy. So empathy does not mean that we don't hold people accountable. It doesn't excuse accountability, but it opens the door for conversation, for discussion, to understand more about what is going on, and for there to be a path toward solutions that we can work on together. And it's not until you get to that point that you can actually begin to build solutions and to begin to move forward. People get stuck in the victim and the settled and the surviving stage of internal crisis response. A resource that I've made available for you today, which also helps with a resource for perseverance and a resource for partnership, is how can we communicate better? How can we use a communication model, which I created, called the CRISP communication model, to help us have better discussions and create that trust and transparency that we talked about earlier? And then how can we also practice empathy individually and work together to build empathy within our team? So there are some thought-provoking questions. There are some exercises, reflective listening exercises as well, that you can use with that tool to help develop empathy. And then inclusion. Empathy also enables inclusion, where we make sure that we are making space for everyone's ideas and contributions to come to the table. The fifth resilience ready principle is praise. And praise is really all about how we acknowledge that there is a lot of effort going on when we are going through change. We're asking people to shift their way of work. We're asking people to do things differently. We're going through disruption. We're working through a crisis. We need to make sure that we do what Brian Tracy encourages and reminds us to do here, is to develop this attitude of gratitude. Say thank you to people for what they do. Even though sometimes thank you seems small, it really goes a long way. So we want to develop this habit of praise. The dean of our College of Business at the University of Louisville, Todd Moradian, really did this so well during the pandemic with our team, where he would just send an email, such as you see here on the screen, or during our calls coming together, or called us together intentionally to build partnership. But with this particular email, he just said thank you for all the effort that everybody's putting in each and every day to make it all work, for us to be great, to transition for our students, and to be able to deliver the best educational experience and be resilient as we were trying to deliver a better and a different educational experience during that time. So you can walk away today with 5 new ideas with how you can, starting immediately, begin to build greater resilience with perspective, inspiring optimism, with purpose, making purpose meaningful for yourself and for your team. Perseverance, set the stage for trust and transparency, and for perseverance and working through the challenges to be able to happen. Partnership, practice empathy and inclusion, and with praise, generously recognize and appreciate your team. And it's when we pull together this framework of these principles and these leadership practices, we can create the kind of work environment where people want to work and where they feel valued. Another resource that is available to you, something that you can do, team resilience is inspired also by intention and getting our teams together to work through these resilience principles, practices, and some exercises and have discussions about what it is we're going through. I created early on in the pandemic a series of discussion guides that leaders can use. They are a series of questions for each of the Resilience Ready principles that just guides you through getting the team together, again, having a conversation about where you are, what you're dealing with, and how you can work through it. So make sure you download those. Again, just to summarize, resources that are available to you today, the resources that I shared with you. Also, if you would like a copy of the slides that I shared during our presentation today, our time together today, that's there for you to download. The other resources, you can access the leader discussion guides. And coming soon, I realized that there is quite a need for people to come together to have more conversations around the challenges they're facing, how to build personal, team, and organizational resilience. And so I'm working on building a mastermind community. If people are interested in that, you can just reach out to me directly on that. But there are lots of resources that are available to you to help you to move forward. All right. Lastly, I just want people to think about, and you can just think about for yourself and feel free to share in the chat. But what did you find was of greatest value for you from our time together today? Was there one starting point, one concept, one principle that says, I believe that if I can start there, I can begin to lead differently. I can begin to build greater resilience for myself and for my team. And I want to end with this quote by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who inspires us that in spite of what we're going through, we can build resilience and we can keep going. And he reminds us that if you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving forward. You can be resilience ready. All right. Be sure you connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about our time together today. Sri, I'd love to entertain any questions at this point that people may have.
Yeah, if you have any questions, please feel free to add in the chat. I did have a couple of questions. After reading your book, I have so many dog ears that I've marked because I need to I need to go back and revisit some of these things again. But one of the things that you mentioned is that organizations in general, leadership is not being trained, or the pipeline of leadership is not being trained to be resilience ready. Mm-hmm. Which I actually completely agree, because it's not something that I've seen in different leadership frameworks that people use. Is resilience is one of the things that you get trained on or coached on or mentored on. So can you talk to me a little bit about what do organizations need to do differently to create that pipeline so that they are resilience ready as they go into a situation where they are leading people through crises?
Yeah, that's pretty easy for organizations to create and integrate resilience and this whole concept of resilience, adaptability. It's a skill set that can be learned. We can learn to be resilient. We can learn resilient adaptability. And the environment's not going to change. It's not going to get any easier. It's not going to slow down any. We're going to continue to, and as leaders, we need to drive change anyway. So how do we do that without creating overwhelm and chaos and burnout on the back end? So integrate and begin to develop leadership development training and integrate resilience in your values and begin to develop it as a competency within your team.
Yeah. The other question or a comment I had is the one thing that I took away from the book and from the presentation today. One aspect that I really think stood out for me was having perspective. You know, because the last thing you want to do as a leader is to panic. Because once you panic, the entire contingent that you lead will panic. But at the same time, you can't act foolish and say, while the Titanic, let's say Titanic is sinking, and you're like, everything is fine, we are all in good shape. So you kind of have to find this balance where you show optimism without being completely foolish by saying everything is fine and while the house is on fire, right? So how do you? I don't know if you want to talk about how do you actually do that? Find that delicate balance where you balance optimism with the fact that things are not great. We have to do some work.
Yeah. In Resilience Ready, I talk about steps really to building a perspective, resilience ready perspective. And one of those first steps before you really can inspire optimism, and I briefly mentioned it earlier, is that you've got to take a reality check.
Right.
So you're not taking a Pollyanna view of your reality, but you are looking at the facts, understanding the facts, and then from there, shifting the question. What can we do? Not how, why can't we? But, how can we work through this differently? What's our new opportunity given this? So that's the first step, one of the first steps you take.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, there was a saying, I think Emmanuel Ram said that, if I remember right, you never let a good crisis go to waste.
Yeah.
Because every crisis there's lies an opportunity.
Truly. Yeah.
Okay. I don't see any specific questions on here. So with that, I'll conclude the webinar today. So thank you so much, Vivian, for being part of this Engage Elise People and Strategy webinar series. This was very insightful for me. I really look forward to reading your other books as well. And by the way, her book again is Resilience Ready, and it's vivianblade.com, right? If you wanted to reach out.
That's
awesome.
Right.
Well, thank you. Until next time.
All right. Thank you, Sri. Great to be with you.